In this lesson, we will be factoring trinomials by grouping. The steps to factoring trinomials by grouping first require us to have the trinomial written in descending order, where you have x squared, then the x term, and then the constant term. Once you have that order, you will begin by multiplying the values of a and c together. You will find a factor pair, which we talked about in an earlier lesson, of AC that adds to the middle part B. You will use the factor pair to rewrite the middle term into two terms. And once that happens, your three-term polynomial will turn into a four-term polynomial, and you'll be able to group factor. So let's look at an example where we are given a trinomial, 6x squared plus 19x plus 10. So we begin by multiplying a and c. A and c are really just the coefficient and the constant of the coefficient of the first term and the constant third term. So if I were to take 6 and 10 and multiply them, that's going to give me 60. And remember, from factor pairs, we're looking for a factor pair in particular, and in this case, it's the one that adds to b. So I'm looking for a factor pair of 60 that adds to 19. So remember our process: 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 6 and 10. And, we could continue doing factor pairs, but we're really just looking for the one that adds to positive 19. See the positive there? So I'm going to take 4 and 15 because that would be the pair that adds to 19. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rewrite my middle term from 19x to be positive 4x and positive 15x. So this will now look like 6x squared plus 4x plus 15x plus 10. Notice that 4x and 15x, if you add them, they're 19x. Now I have two terms in the middle for a total of four terms in the polynomial, and I'm going to factor this by grouping. So remember our process. We underline the first two and then underline the second two. In the first two, our greatest common factor is 2x, and if we factor that out, we'll get 3x plus 2. In the second two, our common factor is 5, and if we factor that out, we'll also get 3x plus 2. So you can see here now we have a common factor of 3x plus 2, and then the other is 2x plus 5. So this process is very much like the one that we use for factoring by grouping. When we start with four terms, we just need to get the trinomial to have four terms so that we can factor it. So let's practice on the second one. We'll take 8 times 5, which is 40. And we're looking for factor pairs that add to 22. And I can continue factoring, but I don't really need to because I can see here that 2 and 20 add to give me 22. So I'm going to take that factor pair and rewrite this as 8x squared plus 2x plus 20x plus 5. Now I'm going to factor by grouping because I have four terms. So in the first two, I have a common factor of 2x, which leaves me with 4x plus 1. And in the second two, I have a common factor of 5, which also leaves me with 4x plus 1. And then this allows me to continue factoring. 4x plus 1 is a common factor, and then 2x plus 5 would be the other. Remember from another lesson, I talked about how you could say 2x plus 5 first and 4x plus 1 second. So let's practice on these next four. If we were to look at our first example here, I'm going to start by multiplying 11, and this is a negative 6, so this is going to be 11 times negative 6, which is negative 66. So if I start by running my factor pairs, I could say negative 1 and 66, negative 2 and 33, negative 3 and 22. Now, I noticed that negative 3 and 22, if I added those, I would get 19. So if I were to write the other pair, 3 and negative 22, that is what is going to add to negative 19, and that gives me the factor pair I need. So if I were to rewrite now, I would get 11x squared plus 3x minus 22x minus 6. And this is going to let me factor by grouping. In the first two, I have an x in common, which gives me 11x plus 3. And in the second two, I see the number 2. I notice this term is negative, so I'm going to do negative 2. And then that also gives me 11x plus 3 and allows me to finish factoring this as common factor 11x plus 3 and then remaining factor x minus 2. And remember, you could say x minus 2, then 11x plus 3. In the second example in this row, I'm going to take 4 and 6 and multiply them together. That's going to give me 24. And I'm looking for a factor pair that adds to negative 11. So I've got 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8. Now that's positive 11 if I add them. So if I do the sign changes, that gives me what I'm looking for a negative 11 in the middle. So this is going to become 4x squared minus 3. Notice that's an xy there. I'm going to say minus 3xy. Minus 8xy plus 6y squared. Now I can factor these. In my first two, I have a greatest common factor of, it looks like x, which gives me 4x minus 3y. And then in the second two, I have a negative first term, and then I notice a 2 and a y. So that is going to give me 4x minus 3y as well. And so as I finish factoring, I get 4x minus 3y and then x minus 2y. Notice that the middle of this had xy, but it didn't matter. We just rewrote it with xy and xy, and then it allowed us to factor. Going to the second row, I'm going to take 10 times negative 3. 10 times negative 3 is negative 30, and that would be negative 1 and 30, negative 2 and 15, negative 3 and 10. I could go on, but I see right here that this adds to 13. So this is going to give me 10x squared minus 2x plus 15x minus 3. Since I have 4 terms, I'm going to factor by grouping. I see 2x. When I divide that out, I'll get 5x minus 1. And then here I see positive 3, and that will also give me 5x minus 1. My common factor is 5x minus 1, and then my remaining factor is 2x plus 3, or 2x plus 3 and 5x minus 1 will work as well. In this last one, I'm going to take 6 times negative 7, which is negative 42. And then I'm looking for pairs that add to the middle. Notice the middle of this does not have a number, but I can think of this as a negative 1. So I am looking for a pair that adds to negative 1. So negative 1 and 42, negative 2 and 21, negative 3 and 14, negative 6 and 7. Now this adds to 1, and it turns out 6 and negative 7, which is interestingly what I started with, turns out to be the factor pair that I need. And if you saw that at the beginning, that's fine. Just use it. So this will give me 6x squared. I'm going to rewrite the center as plus 6x minus 7x, and then I have minus 7. If I group factor, I see that I have a 6x in common, so I'll say x plus 1. And then here I see that I have a negative 7 in common, and that'll give me also x plus 1. If I finish factoring this, I'll have x plus 1 and 6x minus 7. And I've said this before, if you want, you could say 6x minus 7x plus 1. The order of those factors doesn't make a difference. And so this should help you to factor any trinomial that doesn't, or any polynomial that doesn't have the 4 terms. you can change into 4 terms by rewriting the middle into 2 terms, so you would have a total of 4. And you should be able to now factor trinomials by grouping.